Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the CIAS podcast. I'm here with my good friend Ross King, and today we're going to talk about something that is really important and something that you hear about a little bit as far as what it is, but then we're going to go dig deep into this idea, and that idea is how are you in a room? And that, my mind initially goes to the co-writing room. How is your personality? How do you get along with others? Whatever. And that is true, and that is part of this, but there is a lot more to it, because there is actually, to have a successful career as an indie artist or songwriter or both, you're going to need to be in a lot of rooms. So we're going to talk about how you are in all of those rooms, or at least a bunch of those rooms that are important, and things that Ross has experienced and I've experienced along the way. So with that fumbly kind of intro, Ross, let them know exactly kind of your perspective and your outlook. And this is all a part of the 4 parts of...
Yeah, I can go over those if you want.
Yeah, why don't you go through those things, and then we'll hone in on number 3, which is what we're going to cover today.
All right, great. So I often say in both in my coaching and in conversations with people about what we do, that there are basically 4 general elements to success in a creative field, particularly in our field. And those are, in no particular order: raw talent. Can you do something that is in your genre, in your media, whatever? Can you write? Can you sing? Can you play? Can you make videos? Whatever it is. Do you have raw talent for that? Work ethic. Will you work? Will you learn? Will you put the time in, your 10,000 hours, that kind of thing? Suck meter, which we discussed last week. And then how are you in a room? And that how are you in a room, here's how that came about in my mind. When I was kind of putting together some of this coaching stuff and trying to order it and categorize it and make sense of it, I had these other 3, this idea of a work ethic and raw talent, and even kind of a quality control, which we discussed in our last one. But then I kind of was like, well, there's also co-writing and selling yourself and networking and being on stage, and can you be in a studio setting? And I realized this was all about kind of essentially social skills and how to, for lack of a better way to say it, how to present yourself with other people, how to relate to other people with respect to your skill and your gifting, right? So I just kind of put this general umbrella label of how are you in a room? And so that's kind of what it came from, because I realized so much of what I was doing, you can have the talent, you can work to be better at the talent, you can determine with your quality control suck meter if your talent is producing good things. But then you've got to find some way to get your talent out there, right? And you can do that, I guess, from behind a computer and just send things out and, be sort of Marshmello or Daft Punk or something where you're not, there's not a real you. But even that has an element of presentation, right? So
that character still has to do this,
right? And we don't interact the same way with those artists as we do with Justin Bieber or with Mercy Me or something, because we don't see them. We don't see their face. We don't hear them talking, right? So there is an element of how do I present myself in various social, visual, face-to-face kinds of interactions with people. So that's where it came from. And I can break it down for you, but I just mean things like the room. How are you in a room? Any room, okay? So the room could be a co-writing space. The room could be a open mic where no one has a clue who you are, and you've got to give them an intro to you. The room could be in front of actual fans or family or friends who actually know you. Okay, how are you in that kind of room? How are you in a room where someone says, tell me about your music, tell me about what you do, tell me about what kind of sound that you have, and you have to find a way to kind of elevator pitch it, right? On and on and on, right? I'm sure I'm forgetting some. The room could be a studio. And the room could be virtual, right? But what I'm saying is there are all these contexts where it's not just can you do it, it's can you show people that you do it, or can you tell people that you do it, or can you share it in some way that is kind of personal, And that's a weird part about what we do. It's so highly emotional. It's so often tied to people's deepest feelings of hope and fear and joy and pain and that. And so if you have to understand that that we have to bring in those elements. We don't have to, but bringing in those personal elements does have an impact on how your music is received. So that's where the how are you in a room thing came from.
What you just said there, I think that's really probably the crux of the whole thing, is bringing yourself into this thing, because we're all kind of crippled by being like Justin Bieber or Bart Millard or whatever,
Sure.
whatever our whatever the pinnacle is of our genre is like, we think we need to be like that person, or at least some part of us thinks like, oh, well, them being like that got them to where I want to go. So
Right.
logically, I need to be like that in some way. But I mean, I don't think that that's actually it, because I feel like that's a pursuit of trying to chase someone else's, path down, which ultimately, even if we did everything exactly the same, our result would not be the same.
Right.
And two, especially in the Christian music space, like, this is a calling. God didn't call us to copy someone else because he has that person to do that thing already. So it's really valuable to think about that, and how do you interject yourself into what you do? And that seems so simple, but like, I'm thinking about that book, The Purple Cow. Didn't we talked about that before, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's like the concept of the purple cow is, in a field of brown cows, what makes you stand out? What is your purple cow? And I think hunting on that, I don't know. I feel like I want to kind of lean into that a little bit. Like, how do you define? Is it a vision statement? Is it a calling? Is it just like a feeling? Is it repeated?
Right.
Like, what has kind of brought you to lean into all of your Ross Kingness along the way? Because I'm sure when you first started, when you're making those cassette tapes back in the day, you probably didn't have anywhere near the clarity on what you do now then. So like, how did you kind of learn to bring yourself into what you do?
Right. And look, this is, I mean, we could take a long time to discuss this kind of thing, because I've been alive for 50 years. I've been doing this for 25. So longer if you think about, being in bands in high school and stuff, but I've been making music and trying to figure out who that guy is for more years than some people who are listening to this have been breathing. Right. So there's a lot there, and that's one approach. And so I will say that as I've gone on the journey, I've learned a bunch. And, I'll give you a couple of anecdotes to sort of tell that story. But one is that when I first started doing this, my suck meter wasn't so good. And I was completely interested in, I want to sound like this. I would know things that I thought were good, and I would want to sound that way. And so I would write songs that I thought sounded like my version of that. But then I honestly didn't necessarily know how to pull that sound off. I was shooting for two different things and missing them both. Right. So that there was a lot of that in my early days. And I'm interested in this style, and I know how people feel about that style. And I want people to feel like that about me. Right.
Yeah.
I would hear some artists and be like, man, when people see that and hear that, they respond this way. I would love to have that kind of a response. So it wasn't fake, but it was just me still searching, versus now I can look back and see, thank goodness I didn't end up doing that, because that would have been totally wrong for me or whatever. Whereas now, like I think I've told you, this last record that I did last year, and several friends of mine who were varying levels of knowing me say something like, I think you're finally doing what you have been trying to do for a long time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, at that point I was 49 years old, and I'm finally doing what I've been trying to do this whole time. But they were saying you've gotten good at knowing your own thing, right? And doing it comfortably, right? And so some of that's mixing the kind of suck meter with how are you in a room. But the point is, I began to know myself. But with regard to what you're asking, I remember this thing happened about 5 years ago. I wrote this song, and it went pseudo viral, not viral by any like whatever. But for me, it was a lot. I made a little video of it and played it on Facebook, and it got a lot of attention. It was political in nature, so that was part of it. But I asked this friend of mine who was a manager of other artists. He's a guy who had always kind of spoken into my life for free because he was good at it and because he liked me, but he wasn't my manager, But I just called him and said, "Hey, why do you think this is happening? Why is this song doing this?" And he said, "Give me a day. I want to look at some stuff." And so he went to all the social media platforms that the song was doing something on, and he started reading the comments. And he called me back a couple days later, and he was like, "Okay, here's what I hear everyone saying. I hear everyone saying two things. One, this is what I've been trying to say. Guys, watch this video, listen to this song. This is what I've been trying to say." Okay. And two was, "Oh man, I've never heard anyone say it like this." So he said, "Ross, you had this combination of things that you're doing where you're saying, where your songs are, this is what I've been trying to say." So it's got the element of like the stand-up comedian who makes the joke, and you're like, that's how I feel about my kids, or whatever. I was verbalizing something that people were trying to say, and I was doing it artistically. And also, on the other hand, I was doing something that in a way that felt new. Right. So it's like, I've never heard it like this. So the point is, I was learning to kind of go, oh, that's what I've been doing. I didn't know that's what I was doing. That's what I've been doing. So my presentation of my songs had this element of, I'm going to say what you've been trying to say. I'm going to say what I keep hearing everyone saying,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also going to try to be fresh, right? And I don't know that that's totally tied to how are you in a room, but then I realized my personality is like that. Like I am very interested in tapping into what's being said, but I'm also really interested in being fresh, right? So we have some new friends. It's our first like couple friends we've had in a long time. And I made some joke that I knew was on the edge of like being uncomfortable, and they laughed. And I was like, I told my wife, I realize now that I want everything that I make to kind of have an element of I'm nervous whenever I put it out, whether it's a joke or a song or a social media post. I kind of like to have this element of I'm going to put something out there, and it's maybe going to make me kind of scared to put it out there. And that's kind of how am I in a room is I'm always looking to kind of push the boundaries a little bit, not to make people uncomfortable, but just because I enjoy like, let's try something new here. Let's do something new,
Yeah.
So I have to temper that for the rooms, right? Because there are some very conservative situations where someone's really wanting me to be like, I guess like a fundamental Baptist situation or something. I'm on some stage. I want to temper that. What if I'm all about Mr. Edgy and I go into some fundamental Baptist church that's very conservative or whatever? I can't do that. But then I go in this context that's maybe less like that, And so it's a part of this. So much of this is just learning who you are, what you're good at, what's hard for you, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy, what stresses you out, and bringing all of that to bear on your interactions with people in your art. Does that make sense?
Totally. And when we were talking about this beforehand, the idea of emotional intelligence kind of came to mind. And I feel like so much of it is like a sociology experiment, and again, like you were saying, we talked before, like the raw talent aspect, some of that is like just happens. And some people are just better at reading a room, like whatever room they're in, than others. But also it can be learned through experience over time as well. Knowing, like you said, like you're not going to go, hey, publisher, here's my political song. Here's what I want you to hear first.
Right.
That's not going to be the first thing that you present to somebody.
Right.
Even if it's the one you're most excited about, you're going to go into a meeting like that with like, probably the furthest reaching thing you have to start with. And maybe you get there,
Right. Well, and look, so much of this is like you said, learning to read a room. And, I said this last week with the suck meter thing, or last time we did this, that the bad thing about a suck meter is if you don't have it, you may not know that you don't have it. And if you don't have it, it may be hard for you to get it. And this is a similar thing in that part of the how are you in a room was taught to you by other rooms that weren't artistic rooms, other rooms that weren't related to your career. There are people in our business who are just okay at creating, but they're so good at being in rooms, and they'd be good in any business being in a room, they'd be good anywhere. And that's why I always say, those four things, talent, work ethic, suck meter, and how are you in a room, are all flavors. They're all ingredients in the cocktail, right? So it's a situation where you got people who have so much raw talent that they don't need as much of the other three.
Yeah.
But it works the other way too. Like I know people who are just incredibly good with suck meter. And so they are more like editors. A lot of publishers and A&R people have a really, really crazy good suck. They have to. Right. And like I have this friend, his name's Michael Steele, and he was my drummer for years. And I use the example of him all the time, but because he was this, when he was in college, he played drums for me whenever I was a whole lot younger, and he was in college, and he was getting out of college and wanted to be able to play drums, but knew he couldn't make a living at that. So he literally just like went and bought, at the time, like before Creative Cloud was a thing with Adobe, they had this, it was Adobe Creative Suite, and it was all their stuff, right? And he bought it and just learned a bunch of it and became a graphic designer in our town. And he wasn't even he couldn't draw or design that well. He just had a crazy good suck meter, and he could say, I see that font, see that color scheme, it's good. That one's not. And so like a bunch of my like CD cover, whatever, like whatever you call those now, are Michael Steele. And my national friends would be like, dude, this is so good. And I would laugh and be like, Michael doesn't even draw or design. He just knows how to go on the internet and find amazing looking things and put them together. He's awesome at it. He was a collector and then aggregator and editor. Like bam, 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 he puts it together. And my stuff with Michael was awesome. And now he does something else. But the point is, his whole thing was a suck meter. And I think the how are you in a room is similar. You can just be so good in a room that we can enjoy you and want to create with you. We want to work with you because you're so good. And you can be so bad in a room that I don't care how good you are at what you do. You're kind of a turd and I don't want to be around you. I know that's a silly word, but I just like it because it's not as crass as some of the other words that we could use.
Yeah.
But the point is,
I'll bleep it, but it's fine.
There you go. Yeah. And blur my face whenever it happens. Like go all out, like make it do the audio thing. Sorry.
It zooms in, you have like a clown face over you. Yeah.
This joke could get much worse. Anyway, The point is it's when I meet with a publisher, if I'm bragging the whole time, and when I'm a co-writer, if I'm defer about everything and don't say anything, or if I just try to push my idea so hard, that stuff matters. When you're co-writing, there's always two goals. And you got to figure out which one of those goals is more important. And the first goal is obvious. It's how do I make the best piece of art? How do I write the best song, right? So if you and I are writing, I can walk in and say, Brian, let's write a great song. Mm-hmm. But our other goal is to have the best collaborative experience. Now you and I are at a place in our friendship where I don't have to worry about that second goal, because we're good friends now. But sometimes you're walking into a brand new situation with someone who may be raw in a emotional sense or whatever else, just a person who doesn't know you and maybe doesn't get your humor or doesn't, whatever. You might want to raise up best collaborative experience higher in that co-write. And suddenly, how are you in a room is a way more important element to that co-write than suck meter or raw talent, right? Suddenly it matters a ton that you are good in a room. I have this anecdote that I tell a lot, that after my dad, about 10 years ago, my dad died in this accident, and I fell into a depression and it was all crazy. But I went to Nashville about a month. I was still in Texas at the time. I went to Nashville about a month after he died and did my first co-writes. Because I actually was going to go the day after he died. I was scheduled to go, and obviously I didn't go, right? Because I had to cancel. So I went a month later, set up all the same co-writes that I had canceled, and I wrote with some people. And I had this one guy, his name's Paul, who was this great writer who I'd known for a pretty good while. I'd been kind of a fan of his music whenever he was an artist, and I just was way into him. And so we'd hung out a bunch and never really written anything good. We just hung out a lot because it was always for us about the hang, mm-hmm. And which was a bummer because I knew he was a good writer, but we just couldn't get it. So I go into the room. First day I get to Nashville, I'm realizing I probably shouldn't be there. I'm depressed. And I sit down with Paul and I'm like, hey, I know we need to write today. I'm sorry. I'm probably not going to be very good today. I'm depressed about my dad. He's like, I'm so sorry, whatever. And essentially I had this idea for my dad's death and some heaven stuff that I thought was cool, but it was heavy. It wasn't going to be a CCM hit. And he was like, I don't care. Let's do that. And he just essentially, like, I sat on a stool and cried my way through this thing, and he wrote a song while I talked about it, pretty much. And that was about his craft and his how are you in a room. And he was more concerned with giving me a good collaborative experience and with being a good person in the room that day than he was necessarily with getting an amazing song. And the good news is we got an amazing song anyway. But he was so concerned with ministering to me in that moment that his how are you in a room thing was the highest ideal that he was holding up. He wouldn't have, I don't think he knew that. I'm just saying that's looking back, that's what it was. And so that's just, you have to think about that. You're going to walk into rooms, and if you're trying to impress them, there's going to be a certain mindset you're going to have, insecurities. If you're trying to sell them something, if you're on stage, all these things are going to be going through your head, and that's going to be hard, but you have to figure out, how am I best in a room? And again, like we talked about a minute ago, over time, you'll learn that stuff. And some of it you won't know till you look back. But like I even know now, like if you give me a church service on a Sunday morning, there are ways I tell my story that seem to minister in a sort of disarming way. I have a disarming way of talking where I tell these stories that are a little bit on the edge of being too raw, but it makes everyone in the room who's feeling raw feel known. So I do that. It's not fake. It's just that's how I like talking on stage, and I do it. And on a stage in a church, which is a kind of room, that's how I am, and I'm deliberate. And I also know that in some songwriting settings, I give this speech a lot. I will say, "Hey, new people I'm writing with who don't know me, today at some point I'll get super excited about something, and you're going to think I don't like that idea that Ross has, but he's so excited I'm afraid to hurt his feelings. And I want to go ahead and warn you now." I'm probably just excited to be here. You can hate that idea, and it's fine. I'll have more. I'm just excited to be here, but I know enough about myself. I know myself enough to know later today I'm going to be like super hyped about something, and you're going to think, "Uh-oh, that idea is not very good." And Ross is so excited. So I warned them. One way I am in a room is I'm excited in writing rooms because I love co-writing so much that I'll get super jazzed today in the middle of this. And I'm warning you, don't get scared off by that. Don't be intimidated to like agree with me. I'm an idea guy. I'll have more. But in that moment, I'm excited, right? So that's me knowing myself. I've learned, I can push people around by my excitement by accident. So I know that. So you just need to like be the kind of person who learns that about yourself.
Right. Because it may come through having difficult things have happened and you say, I'm not going to do that again, probably.
Yes.
So that self-awareness, again, it's like the suck meter, like you said, but this all filters through to one thing. It's like, you may need to know, and it's not, like you said, it's not being fake or manipulative or chameleonizing yourself. It's just being aware of, if you burst into a room where everyone's super excited about something, and you're not going to say, hey, let's write a song about death today, unless it's about, death and resurrection or something, whatever. But
sure.
If you run into a publisher meeting or a label meeting, you're not going to be like, hey guys, I'm going through a really tough time today. And it's this, I'm terrible. You don't want to work with me at all. Like, that, just feeling it out. I think a lot of it too, I know for me personally, like walking into like those type of situations, there's a lot of emotions at play. You want to impress the people you're around in some way, or at least like not seem like a total like weirdo or whatever. But like, so working through your own fog, and kind of becoming present in the moment probably has a lot to do with that. And getting to that presence as quickly as possible is probably really critical. And two, so we talked about people that may not get it or may not, and it could be difficult. So I wanted to throw this out there. We didn't talk about this before, but like, what are some things, because you've experienced a lot of people in a lot of different rooms, what are some things to just like not do? What are some things to just try to avoid, as sort of a go-to is like in your tool belt, like, I'm not going to, even if I feel like I want to do that, maybe I shouldn't do that, at least not at first.
I try not to fart a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, a little bit, not a lot.
Well, you gotta be polite,
Yeah, I mean, it's like, excuse me. I say excuse me after I fart. I say my bad.
Gaseous expulsion.
I say my bad a lot.
My bad. That's the title of the episode. I try not to fart a lot. There it is.
Sorry. This is me and Brian, unfiltered. If you're super political, just don't be. If you are very, very opinionated about things that are controversial, just there's no reason to do that. That will ruin a room so fast. Walking in saying your opinion on some hot topic or saying some culturally sort of provocative thing, don't be let's go Brandon, don't be I hate Trump. Don't do any of that mess in the room. With your religious beliefs, I'd be, careful not to assert here's exactly what's true. And I know it's, again, it's not because you're being wishy-washy. There's just, if your goal is to create a great song, why would you do anything to potentially hinder that? Right. And I don't need to win those battles in that context. I want to write great music, so I don't care. And I write with a lot of people who of different religious beliefs and who aren't religious in any way at all. And again, I'm just going to say this confessionally. This is my weakest area of the four. I have a good bit of raw talent. I think I have a pretty high suck meter. I work hard. How are you in a room is my hardest thing because I have a strong personality. I don't always have a good filter. I tend to be hard on my sleeve, which can make me a really good songwriter, but in a room it can be something difficult because I can be a little bit too transparent or whatever. And so I've just learned things like I try not to be cynical about the results, which is really hard for me. Like in the CCM world, I tend to like struggle to not say, this is not going to land on the radio if we do it like this, and people hate that, even though it's practically right and productive. It doesn't help the room. But yeah, I mean, I would just say do your best to, when you walk into a room, if it's new people, there's different rules, right? If it's your friends and somebody or if you have a go-between there that's going to help you, whatever. If it's new people, read the room, ask questions, try to listen, research the person that you're going to go work with. You're writing with an artist, go listen to their stuff prior to this. If it's a writer that has written with other people, maybe before you go in, say, hey, show me something that you've done that you're happy about or that you're proud of. The downside of this podcast topic is you could take this out of the context of music and say, how to not be a jerk.
Yeah.
Or how to be a pleasant person. One of the things I talk about in my coaching when I do my collaborative teaching stuff is I say, on my gigs, I've been to beautiful places that my wife and kids didn't go with me, and it was okay. And I've been to lame, boring, uncool places with my wife or with my kids, and I had a blast. The primary factor in enjoyment of a trip is not where you go or how you get there, it's who you're with. It's your traveling companion, right? That is the primary factor in all of our. And again, if you like to be all by yourself, then that's a factor too, right? But we're talking about rooms, we're talking about social interaction. So be a good traveling companion. Realize that you can get a killer song, you can be in a killer studio space, you can be on the beach in Florida or in the mountains of Colorado, and it can be awful if you're awful, if you're just not fun to be with. And that's a huge, 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 huge truth. And that's deep in our soul. Like God made us like that. Like that's how we're made to care who we're with. That matters. So that's the thing, is that just imagine, who would I want to be with? What kind of person would I want to be? And I say this a lot too, these are a lot of my kind of creeds and things, but every collaborative experience should give you in equal parts. If it's doing its job, it should give you equal parts of two feelings. And those feelings are, I'm really good at what I do. And wow, I got a lot of work to do to be as good as this person at what they do. Right. And, or I really need this person. Right. So you should always be carrying in your heart, as you're doing collaboration, things that affirm you in your gift and things that humble you, that you need others. Right. And so if you do your job well on how you are in a room, then you will get affirmed because you'll be doing your great thing in a sense of security and comfort. And of course, you can't control how they're going to be, but I'm saying if it goes well, then you'll get that. And if you're watching and listening and being attentive to them and giving them a chance to be the best version of themselves, then you'll get humbled by, wow, even though I'm better at them in this area, gee, I see how great they are in this other area.
So much of that is like just realizing that this is a team sport.
Right.
Life is a team sport. God made man because he didn't want to be alone, and then made woman because we didn't want man to be alone. So obviously that's, like you said, it's built into our DNA, our DNA. But I feel like most people that I've met are introverts to a degree, especially in the creative space. But something happens when a bunch of introverts come together, is we can actually be extroverted in that safe environment, because we're all kind of in our own heads. We're like, hey, they're in their heads too, so let's be extroverted together in this situation. So learning how to figure this out is really critical, even if it goes against your nature, especially. And I was going to kind of say, your thoughts on how much has this internet age, this, the disconnection, virtual connection, I suppose, kind of changed or modified this. And because my thought is it hasn't really changed at all. I would say that it feels more difficult because of the physical disconnection. I mean, but at the same time, like you and I are talking right now,
right?
And if it wasn't for the internet, we wouldn't know each other the way we do. So
right.
I think it's a great tool, and I always say it's a great tool, but also I feel like it also can help us lean into, in a bad way, oh, well, I don't have to really go out there in the world. I don't have to be good in a room, because I can figure it out. I can make amazing sounding music from my home and throw it out there, and people seem to like it or whatever. But I think what we're talking about here, and what I feel like honing in on, is the importance of kind of forcing yourself, if need be, to get out there and to experience rooms, because the only way to get there is by doing it. And even if it's hard, I know for me it's really difficult, especially depending on the season I'm in. It's much easier to kind of hide away and just not face it, but that only makes it more difficult. And honestly, you're kind of robbing yourself, speaking to myself here, of developing your own personal skills. Because I kind of want to talk about charisma, because I feel like some people might hear this and be like, oh, well, I'm not a front man, I'm not a front woman, so how can I electrify a room? Because I'm thinking of this is one thing I don't know we've talked about a lot, but I'm not a big Taylor Swift. I don't really get the Taylor Swift phenomenon, but I do respect it. I understand what she's done, but she must have an incredible power in a room whether it's in a label meeting or on a stage,
Right.
or social media, whatever she does to just electrify the people around her. Does that mean she's the greatest singer? I would argue no. Does that mean she's the greatest songwriter? I would argue no. But like, she's proven that she has this ability to just like bring people into her world, and she can be an authority in that space. So she obviously works well in a room. So like, what would you say? I know that we've kind of probably talked about it a little bit, but like, what would you say to like the people that are like, oh, I'm too introverted. I can't possibly, I'm too nervous to even meet with somebody, or I'm too nervous to even ask about a co-write. Like, what are some practical skills or things to kind of lean into to kind of get them out of that?
Right. And look, and you and I have said this before, but so much of this is about goals. So it's always about like, well, if you want to do this, then you're gonna have to do this, right?
Yeah.
And so there are people, look, who are too introverted to be artists, or too introverted to do what they need to do. There are factors that are true about my life, whether it's that I'm 50, whether it's that I have 4 children that have very specific personalities and needs, and a wife, and I live in Nashville, and I used to live in Texas, and there's a bunch of things, right? There's no question that looks like Phil Wickham. It helps that he looks like he does. Can we just say that? That guy's beautiful. He's a beautiful man, all right? And that helps. It just does. And we can act like that doesn't help. It just does. And there are other people who don't look like him that are just as successful. I'm just saying all the things come together. Right. Yeah. And it doesn't make us vain to say all that. People who can sing the phone book or whatever are going to have a different way to do this than people who can't. People who are great, like they're instrumentalists. You and I have talked a lot about, we both know Michael Farron, who is so good at presenting his idea that I'm sure he has to work harder to have a suck meter, because he can sell you on something because he's such a good instrumentalist, such a good singer. His personality is so compelling. He just can win a room. It's easy for him. So I would, if I were Michael Farron's coach, I'd be like, hey man, be sure that you watch out for a good suck meter, because you're going to win every conversation because you're good at this. Right. And that's not saying he doesn't have one. I'm saying, I, because I'm a mediocre singer and a mediocre player, I work super hard to make sure my words and melody are good so that anybody can sing them and play them. And I work super hard to try to be funny and interesting in the room, because I know I can't be like, hey, well, watch this, and just start playing some awesome thing. I can't do that.
Yeah. So
you have to say, who am I? What do I want to do? And how do those things work? So if you are someone, there's that joke, that my haircut woman used to make. Like, you can walk in here with a picture of Brad Pitt and say, cut my hair like that. You won't look like Brad Pitt whenever I finish cutting your hair. You'll just have his haircut, but your head looks different. Everything about you is different from Brad Pitt. You're just both people. You're both humans, right? That's about it. And what I'm getting at is you have to have goals that say, all right, I want to be co-writing all the time. I'm very introverted. What I got to do to be more comfortable at that? I want to be co-writing with lots of different kinds of people, including people who don't play. Well, I don't play. Okay, well, that won't work then. You got to be with people who can play, because you don't play. Whatever it is, right? I mean, there's a guy named Matt Armstrong who's an incredible songwriter here in town who doesn't sing very well. And he will tell you that. He goes, I don't really sing. He's an okay singer, but he just gets melody. But he goes into sessions knowing if it's someone new, I don't sing well. Look, you've talked about this. You are visually impaired. You have to go into these settings saying that's a factor that's going to be true for me. And you've adjusted some of your how are you in a room according to that, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, you can't drive to places, right? So you have to adjust what you do for that, right? Parts of my personality, I have a stutter, I have my age, whatever else, all those things are factors. And so I say, if right now, as a 50-year-old man who's had a 25-year career, I decided I wanted to do certain things with my career and they didn't easily fit that, I'd have to adjust some things. Maybe ditch that goal, but at the very least, adjust that goal to fit my strengths and then adjust the work I want to do on my strengths to fit the goal, right? And that, I know that sounds kind of like vague, but I'm just saying we have to be realistic about who we are, what's possible for us. And that isn't about like, are you pretty enough or cool enough? That stuff is a factor always, but I'm saying things like, in the current season my life is in, I have 4 kids, 3 of them are teenagers. They're busy. They have needs and things. So I do certain things differently right now in this season. Even right now in football season and in the beginning of a school year, I do different things than I would do because my kids and my life are a certain way that they are. And I continue to adjust that based upon seasons of life. When I was depressed, I had to really kind of like get myself ready for certain kinds of songwriting things because I was depressed and I knew, okay, Ross, this is the pattern of behavior. When you get in a room, if you don't do this exactly the right way or whatever, that's just part of this, is looking at who you are, what you're good at. And so a lot of this is going to be, I talk a lot about how collaboration and honest critique are these two sort of like chisels on your creative life, that working with people so that you learn what they're good at, what's out there, who else is good at what you're bad at, all that, and then taking honest critique about it. I remember I one time asked this A&R guy in town, what do people say about me? And I was so scared because he's a super honest guy, and he said some hard things about me and some cool things, but the hard things were a shock. I didn't know them, and that was hard. And I've adjusted who I am since then. Actually, the really good things were kind of a shock too. I didn't expect what he said, which that's important to do, and a lot of us don't want to do that. A lot of us can't find anyone to do that for us. So you got to be searching for people who will shoot straight with you. Send your songs into professionals and let them tell you the truth. And when they tell you the truth, listen and know that they may be wrong, but you asked them because you thought they'd be right. So you should start with the default that they're probably right. So that's part of it, is like, how are you in a room is also how you receive what's said to you. What do you do when the audience doesn't clap after a song or laugh after a joke that you thought would work? What do you do? How do you handle that? What do you do differently with a Christian publisher than a Christian A&R, than a sync publisher, than a person who manages artists? How do you talk to those people, learn to relate in those worlds? And so I'm not trying to overwhelm people, but I am trying to say the bad news is it's more than how good you are at your art. The good news is it's more than how good you are at your art. Right? And that'll be good and bad news depending on who you are and what you're good at. But you and I have said this to each other a couple of times. There are people who do what we do who are way better than us and less successful and not as good as us and more successful. It's not only about can you do the thing. Some of those folks are just really, really good. We've said this, Graham Cochran is just so good presenting what he does. Mm-hmm. And his recording stuff between us and these podcast folks is not that great. Right? But he's so good at presenting it. He's so good. And he just made it so easy and accessible and fun that people loved it. And now that his real calling he's hit, coaching, he's so good at it. But it's not for him about like a raw talent thing as much as about he's a crazy good suck meter, and how is he in his room? Incredible.
Yeah, and I think you said it before, but I think this is really valuable, is like you can become so good in a room that it almost can become the most important. Like, and you did say that before, but like Graham Cochran is an example. Like, it doesn't matter how good he is at teaching you how to do Pro Tools or how good, whatever. Like, and I mean, honestly, I've been a Cochranite for a long time, so like I believe in what he does. But like, he's a great example because like he's got this massive thing. He's got 2 really successful businesses that he just kind of made up, and started in YouTube a lot of years ago or whatever. But like, he's just so good in a room talking to you through a screen or whatever the circumstance is, that like it doesn't even really matter, because like he can inspire you. Maybe that's kind of like the critical mass of this whole thing, is like, are you good enough in a room to inspire someone to either like bring you on their team, or to write the best songs they can, or to go out and do something because of the song you shared? It kind of comes down to that. Like, can you motivate and inspire somebody because you're just that aware of feeling the pulse in that room, no matter what it is? It can be, sharing a song at a retirement home, but you do it in a way to where you inspire those people to feel like, yeah, you know what?
Right. Well, and part of this, Brian, sorry to cut you off. Part of this is that if you apply yourself to this learning process, you'll learn which kinds of rooms you are best in and which you aren't, and then adjust accordingly. Right. And again, this gets back to some of that productivity stuff that we both read a lot of, where do you work at all on things that you're bad at, to make them up to a 4 when they're never going to be an 8? Or do you just work on the things that are already 7s to get to be 9s and 10s? I don't know. But you will learn, okay, when I go into these kinds of settings, it's harder for me. So I've got to adjust. I go into these settings, oh man, I'm usually pretty golden. This is easy for me. Like, I now know, I'll give you an example. If you give me an opening act gig with like 3 songs, I have zero insecurity, because I've been writing songs for 30 years. And if you give me 3 songs, I mean,
they're going to be good.
That's like the greatest hits of my greatest hits of my greatest hits, right? It's going to work, right? And I know how to talk to that group, that kind of thing. But if you put me in a room with like a A&R person who I'm trying to impress as an artist, I don't know what to do. And I get nervous. Or if you put me in a big group, like I just voluntarily said no to this songwriting retreat that my old publisher put on, and it looked amazing. And I'm just like, oh man, why did I say no to that? But I'm so uncomfortable in those 5-day go somewhere rooms full of people who are all really funny and fun and charismatic. I'm deeply uncomfortable in those settings. And by the end, I'm usually kind of grumpy, and I knew I probably wouldn't enjoy this and be great at it. I probably wouldn't be great at it. So I adjusted. Now I might do it next time. I've done it before, and I might do it, but I just felt like right now in this season, I wasn't going to enjoy that. That's a room I wasn't going to be great in, right? And so so I stayed here and did a bunch of other things that I am good at, and I missed that chance, right? And then that might have been a great networking time. Who knows what all, it looked awesome. And I'm having to watch on the socials how good it was. But I'm saying, I don't think I would have been a great in that room. And so I'm adjusting. And I hope to get better in rooms like that. I hope I keep getting better. And in different times of life, I may be better. But right now, I just felt like I was too busy and too many other things. And some of this is learning how to deal with FOMO too, right? Because you'll get opportunities and you'll have to say to yourself, I'm not good in these kind of rooms, or today I wouldn't be good in this kind of room, or I'm not good in this kind of room today because of these factors, you know? But all this is you learning how you work best and how you work worst, when you've succeeded, when you haven't, and setting yourself up to succeed as much as you can by this self-awareness piece of what am I like in these settings? And, you know, you can even kind of control it sometimes and say, I know I'm not as good. Like this is dumb. Okay. But I've learned over these 5 or 6 years of being in Nashville rooms and the 10 years prior of doing a lot of co-writing, I've learned I'm better in the morning than in the afternoon. I'm better in a large room where I can feel like I can pace versus a small room. I'm better with less people than more. So like 1 or 2 at the most is better to me than 4 or something. They can give you 10 more things, right? But I'm saying there are ways in which I feel like going into a co-writing room, I'm going to do better. There's also ways I've learned I don't like doing outside stuff, like concert type stuff. I don't like doing them outside. I like being outside, but I'm not good outside. My songs are too thought driven and I'm too ADD and I just don't like doing it. Right. Yeah. So I learned, yeah, exactly. I learned those 2 rooms, you know, things. So I occasionally say no or ask for something different than what I'm being offered. If I'm going to be put in these situations that have historically been tougher for me to succeed in.
But you've gained that through doing it. You know,
right.
It's through stepping out and it's actually doing it. It's how you kind of realize where you're best at. Because, you know, the biggest thing is like, I mean, I feel like this plagues so many people. Probably anyone listening, they've dealt with this. You just got to do it. You just have to start. And it's not going to be pretty. It's probably going to be sloppy. It's probably going to be embarrassing. You know, hopefully not. Hopefully it's none of those things. But in my experience, usually when you do things for the first, it's just kind of awkward and weird, you know, but when you do it, each time it becomes less awkward, it becomes less weird. And then you can, like you said, you can develop those things where like, because unless you played a bunch of outdoor concerts where you swallowed a fly while you're leading worship or whatever those other things have happened along the way, you wouldn't know. You can't just say, you know, I've never played a show before, but I don't prefer to play outside. The only way you know that is by doing it a bunch. So as we kind of wrap up, like any kind of closing thoughts or like, you know, ideas of like, I know we've covered so much good stuff here, but like how can people just lean into this thing where like, okay, if you want to do this, because like you said too, like you don't have to, all this stuff is, you don't have to do any of it. This is all just, you know, us trying to set you up for success as you're trying to pursue this in the best way that we know from our joint experience here. But like, if you want to be in the modern music industry and you want to do well and you want your songs to get out there, you want your artistry to get out there, like it's going to take collaboration. It's going to take being good in a room to do that. So like, what are some like, you know, closing practical thoughts of like?
Yeah. I mean, one, like I said, work with people and then try to get honest critique about what you've done, both critique of the art and critique of the experience. So to the extent that you can get people to be honest, ask them how you were in a room, you know, ask them how you felt like that went. You and I have both been in situations where we were, you know, part of a multiple room, multiple person thing and thought, that person's mad at that person, and that's keeping them from working together well. We've seen that stuff, and we've probably been that stuff at some level. We've been the person up frustrated. We've been the source of frustration, whatever. But you learn that by watching and asking. Again, we live in a very polite, dishonest, not actively dishonest, but like just sort of not overly honest culture who we're not going to tell everybody how we feel.
Right.
And one of my greatest frustrations of working in CCM is that people are not as honest about things as I wish they would be in that way, because we could all learn a lot more. But invite honest critique as much as you can. I would say, and this is counterintuitive, and it's very, very much against the sort of like business playbook, but don't see first impressions as your only impression. Don't see, I get one shot at this and then it's whatever. There's practical reasons why that's true at some level, but you have to walk into situations thinking, I'm going to invest and maybe not get today the thing that I want because I'm playing a long game, and that's things like when I meet someone in like a co-write, I might say, hey, give me your 10-minute story. What's your story? And I love that question because it invites, tell me whatever you want to tell me about you. And if they say, what do you mean? I would say, tell me whatever you want to tell me about you, and that might end up taking 20 minutes. It usually does. If they feel a need to share, let it go there. Don't worry about the clock and how much time you have. Let it go there. Like if I'm writing with someone and it's time for a bathroom break, for me, I will say, hey, I'm going to go to the bathroom, grab a drink of water, fill up my coffee, whatever. While I'm gone, I want you to make some decisions about this song that you want to make and that you would make if I wasn't coming back. I want you to think about this. I want you to do some things. I want you to try some stuff out that maybe you've all day wanted to try out, but I've been keeping you from doing it. And when I get back, I want to know what they are. Maybe there won't be any, but I want you to think like, what would I do if Ross wasn't going to come back and he gave me full control of this, because then I invite them to kind of be like, well, you've been kind of pushing against this and I like, and doing that, you might get something you hate. I'm just being honest, but I don't worry as much. Hey, well, that ruined the song. This is the only song we're ever going to write together. And this is the best song ever. And they just ruined it. I don't do that, and occasionally there is a best song ever and you want to fight for it, but it's just probably not as often as you think. It's usually not that. So I just try to make room for people to push back on me and to really enjoy their own ideas as much as they can. Yeah, I try to invite as much like creative failing, safe failing as I can, right? I want them to feel like they can just try things out, Collaborating with people, getting honest critique, and then finding ways to ask honest questions, and giving people as much freedom as you can to be themselves.
It seems so simple, but we all know that can be very difficult, to do. And it takes practice and intention because everyone's, most people are going to be like, okay, Mom, here's my song. Tell me how awesome it is. Oh, cool. You love it. Awesome. Well, the reality is like, that doesn't really help. I mean, sure, it might help in some way, but like really like getting a good check of what your output is in the circumstance. I love that you were able to ask that, that guy, like how people perceive you, because you would never get that information otherwise. And not that everyone has that kind of access to like, hey, what does the industry think about me? But like in your own world, you can grow to that by, getting your face in the game, so I love that. And I think there's so much actionable stuff here. And
I want to tell you one quick story to close it, if that's okay. Because this is to me is a great confession of like how I grew in this. I got a chance to write a few years ago with what would be arguably one of the most well-known Christian musicians in the business. And we were already friends, but we had never written. And we wrote together, just the two of us. And let me say, and I've told you this story probably privately, so you know who this is. But we have a very similar gifting. He's just more successful at it than I am. I'm more singer-songwriter, quirky. He's more like down the middle, crushing it on the Christian radio. And we wrote together. And when it was over, I told my publisher, hey, he was like, was it good? And I was like, it's okay. I feel like he shut down all of my ideas. And he said, something funny. Just before you called me, he called me and said the same thing about you. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was like, no way that's true. That's just not true. Right. But I don't know if it was true, but the fact is something about our connectivity, our energy, the sync between us had this brokenness where we were both too insecure to really listen and receive each other. And I'll just be honest, in that setting, it was more on me than it was on him, because he's the artist I want to write with. He's the person I'm trying to, if we write something that I end up liking, okay, that's cool. But in my business for the year, I want him to like it. He's
Right.
the artist that's really, really successful. And so I had to learn in that day, Ross, what are you doing that's shutting down someone who's so famous and so like good at this that they felt insecure around you? Now we could say, oh, it's his insecurity. I don't have a clue if it was. Doesn't matter. I'm going to take that moment and say, what could I have done different? Because the first question you should ask when you get a critique that bothers you is it true? But the second question is, if it's not true, why do they think that?
Mm.
Sometimes the answer is just, well, they're crazy. But usually it's because you're doing something that looks like the thing that they think that they're seeing, right? So maybe I'm not arrogant, but am I doing something that seems arrogant? Maybe I'm not a bully or whatever it is. Maybe I'm not, monopolizing the time, but it's something I'm doing feels like that.
Yeah.
Right. And I got to figure that stuff out because I want to love them well and I want to make great art with them. The goal is, how do we make great art together?
Yeah.
Right. That's the goal.
Yeah. And I think it's a perfect way in my mind to close this is like, how are you in a room? The good news is that there's a lot of rooms that you're going to be in. And like you said, first impressions, important. And hopefully not be all end all, but in some cases that might be the case, but in a lot of cases they're not. And the good news is as you do this, there's a lot of rooms that you're going to be in, so you can develop it along the way. And being self-aware of that, and two, perception is critical because you might think that you're a certain way. And like you just said in that great story, it's like, well, that person perceived you in a different way than you thought,
Right.
So like, it may not matter how we view ourselves. And how do you gain that? Like you said, by getting outside feedback on what you do and whatever level you can get that at. That's the only way, because it's just like when I'm producing, the top line of my session is going to be a reference track from somebody else who's better than me. The song's bigger than mine, because I want to be what I'm doing against what they're doing. And it's painful because like, how do they get their kick so big? I don't know. I'm trying so hard, but like the only way to get that experience is by putting yourself through that critique process. So
that's right.
I think that's really good. Well, let me pray to close us out. And I'm excited. I love doing this. Can't wait to do the next one. But God, thank you so much for this day. Thank you so much for the idea that you are the God who creates all of these rooms and all these opportunities, Lord. And you've created each one of us to be able to jump in and do what we're supposed to do and called to do. And as we take a good hard look at ourselves and enlist other people that we can trust to kind of give us feedback on what we're doing, God, let us receive that open-handedly. Let us receive that with humble hearts, to realize that in love, they're giving that to us so that we can do this the best way we can. Because at the end of the day, that's all that we're really trying to do, God, is we're trying to make impact through the songs and the things that you've given to us. And of course, that all comes through our personality and our own selves, Lord. So as we're learning to grow in our calling, grow in our gifting, we have to realize that our personality and the way that we're perceived is important. So let us rest that you've created us to be exactly how we are, and just lean into ourselves, because at the end of the day, no matter what we face, no matter what our weaknesses or strengths are, God, we carry it through our own way and our own personalities, Lord. So just let that shine through and just guide and direct us to the people that we're supposed to be in, the rooms that we're meant to be in, and be okay with that and rest and be settled in that fact that maybe we went to a situation and we just felt awkward. It just didn't work out. Well, that room maybe wasn't meant for us, but we can take the experience we gained from that room and bring it into the next one that we're meant to be in, God. So we pray that anyone listening just is motivated and inspired by this conversation, Lord, and that they can go and take their gifts and callings and get into the rooms that they're meant to be in and make the most impact they can. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen.